appropriate. You always are. And also, hey, Yana, make sure that your mic is turned off unless you're the group who's presenting or unless I ask for class comments. All right, so go ahead and post your entrance slip in the chat bar. This is one way to let me know that you're here. What's one question you're excited to ask during our discussion today, or what's one quote or part of your text that you really want to talk about? So basically, what's one thing you're excited to talk about in our discussion today? Go ahead and post that in the chat bar. Ooh, cool, Jonathan. Okay, whoops. Some of our other responses. You can read through your friends' responses too, especially any peers who you know are going to be in your group. Lorena, a lot of people are really into the This is Water does have that really interesting metaphor. Carla, I love that you're bringing in that trauma lens. Got some good quotes from Hiba and Yana. The intersection of empathy and well-being. That's interesting, Ian. All right. If you're still typing, that's totally fine, but I'm going to move on to kind of like our instructions for class today because I want to make sure you guys have as much time to talk as possible. Okay, whoops. So go ahead and take a quick look at who's in your group in case you don't remember, and look at who is going when. So we're going to follow this order this time. So Jonathan, Brenda crew will go first. Layla, Yana, Kiara, Christian, Alina are second. Group 3 is Noir, Arham, Naram, Ian. Group 4 is that Marcus Avi squad. Group 5, Carla, Bisma, Charday, Lorena, Carlos. Group 6, Saul Jr., Kyle, Caesar, and Joel. Okay. If you have any group members that are not here, just let me know, because what we'll do is, as long as most people here are here, we should be fine. Like I know Rita's out today. Go ahead and comment in the box if you notice that there's any group members who like are MIA, and we'll kind of deal with that. Okay, so Arham's MIA. If the rest of group 3, okay, so it seems like an Abi. So it seems like everybody who's missing, there's still at least 3 members in your group, which I think is enough to have like a fruitful 4-minute discussion instead of a 5-minute discussion. So groups 3 and 4, do me a favor and just remind me that I need to shorten your timer a little bit, okay? Seems like everybody else is here. Cool. Saul and Joel. Okay, so group 6, we're going to do the same thing for you guys. And group 1. You know what? Let's just have 4-minute discussions today. Cool. That's totally fine. Because we're missing... Artov's on his way. Hey, Artov. We're missing Brenda. Okay. I just want to make sure I keep track so I can check in with those friends later. Okay, so pinwheel discussion. When you are not discussing, you should be taking notes on the strengths and weaknesses of the other group who's presenting. So for example, group one is that like Jonathan, Hiba, Suhaili, Reed. So Jonathan, Hiba, Suhaili squad. So I'm going to be writing down, oh, I really liked the quote that Jonathan used. I'm noticing that maybe they're not really like building off of each other's ideas. I'd like to see, friends, you should be writing these down in your digital pinwheel discussion notes. Why is that not appearing? There it is. Okay, so you've already done the mind map and you've already done, you've already written out your discussion questions. So you'll be filling that in here. So group one is gonna be that Hibber Jonathan squad, Suhaili. So I'd like you to write down at least one strength and at least one weakness of that group. And then in new things you learned, this is going to be really helpful for the last section. You're going to be writing down like, is there anything that this discussion made you think about? So, wow, I'd never really thought about empathy like that. I didn't know that there was a difference between sympathy and empathy, so that's really interesting to me. Or is there a text that they mentioned, like this is water, that you're like, ooh, maybe I'll go and read that if I have some extra time this evening. That's what goes in this section, new things you learned. Okay. After the 5 minutes are over, we're actually going to do 4 minutes today. After the 4 minutes are over, I'll ask the rest of the class for a strength, a weakness, and something you learned. So when that time comes, you can just go ahead and take your microphone off mute, turn yourself back on. And if you decide to share out a strength or weakness or something you learned that you wrote down, something somebody said that you thought was really interesting or cool, then I'm going to write you down in my handy dandy notebook and you will get bonus points for the day. So 6 out of 5 instead of a 5 out of 5. Okay, so that's what you're doing when it's not your turn to discuss. When it is your turn to discuss, you will be given 4 minutes. Make sure that everybody has a chance to speak at least once, hopefully more. The things that we're looking for, these are mostly familiar to you guys. We're looking for everybody to be an active member of the conversation, that equity of voice piece. Members to respond to and build off of each other's ideas. We're looking for direct text references. And we're looking for thoughtful questions. Something that's new that I'd like to see is connecting the text to yourself. So like a lot of what the texts we've been talking about have had to do with well-being and empathy and happiness. And I think those are things that are all on our minds right now since our worlds have kind of been completely turned upside down. So if there's something that this text made you as a person think about, wow, this really made me think that I haven't been as empathetic as I could have been to those nutty protesters in Michigan. I wonder if there's something I can kind of do to like not agree with them, but like still like be empathetic towards them, try to understand their side of things, for example, or something. So that's what you'll be doing while you're speaking. After our discussion is over today, we should be able to get through all groups we did last time, and I think I'm only going to give you guys 4 minutes because a lot of your groups are missing a person or are smaller because we're a smaller class. If we don't, we'll hold an additional Google Hangout on Friday just for that group to hop on really quick and complete their discussion. After the discussion, you guys are responsible for completing the reflection, which is the last section of that digital pinwheel document that I gave you. So what you're going to do, you should have made a copy of this text already and filled it in with your stuff. You'll delete these lines and you'll write your answer. What's a claim you can make about what these texts reveal about empathy or well-being? Support your claim with evidence from the discussion. So I'm looking for you guys to either A, include a quote from one of the texts that was mentioned. So like the This Is Water metaphor, or something they said in Finding Fred, or whatever. The other thing you can do is you can do a quote or a paraphrase of something someone said in the discussion. So when Kiara said that the Post-Secret TED Talk really made her think about how everybody has something different going on that we don't necessarily know about, that would be fine. I'm just looking for you to include evidence. I will give you a 10 out of 10 for completing this little document and handing it in to me by Friday at midnight. However, I will be highlighting these and giving you guys feedback like I normally do, because I want your grades to continue to climb. I do also want to give you feedback on how you're doing with what I'm asking you to do. Okay. So, does anybody have any clarifying questions about this discussion? If so, go ahead and post them in the chat bar. You can also turn your mic off silent if you want to just ask it out loud.
I have a quick question. So when we're like writing how the other groups are doing, is each box for a certain person, or is one box like one group?
One box, one group.
Okay, thank you.
I'm expecting you to write 1 to 2 things down per group.
Mm-hmm.
I got some feedback from my class session yesterday that it was kind of overwhelming to be like constantly transcribing while also listening to what people were saying. So just like write down one thing that in each of those boxes that you think really stands out to you. And that'll hopefully give you, it's just so you have something to go off of when you do write that reflection at the end of class today or on Friday or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No. Will you, like, since you're recording this, will you post this so that, like, we can look back for references?
Definitely. I will post it as soon as it finishes downloading to my Google Drive, because it ends up being like a 45-minute session. It does take a couple minutes to upload, but as soon as I get it down, I'll send it to you guys. Anybody else? Okay, sweet. So our group to start today is going to be Jonathan, Hiba, and Sue Haley. Actually, I think what we'll do is I'll give you guys 1 minute per group member. So there's 3 of you here today. Go ahead and turn your mics on. I'm going to turn mine off. And as soon as one of you starts talking, I will start the timer.
Okay, we're starting, right? Okay, so I guess I'll start off by asking my group members, what is the text you read and how does it connect to empathy? I'll start off. So I read The Limits of Empathy by David Brooke, and what I got from the text was that he believed that empathy doesn't help like a person unless they have to sacrifice something, since he says, like, this is a direct quote, empathy orients you towards a moral action, but it doesn't seem to help much when the action comes at a personal cost. He also explains that empathy is like a universal feeling that just justifies weakness that we feel in a particular situation.
My text is This Is Water, and it shows that empathy as a way of trying to understand why a person might be acting a certain way rather than just judging them quickly. How is empathy brought up in your text?
Well, in my text, empathy is kind of, well, in my perspective, based on what the author kind of wrote, he wasn't necessarily saying that like empathy was a bad thing, but he also wasn't saying it was something good. He was kind of saying that it's just like an overall emotion that everyone feels, but you don't really justify it until you have to sacrifice something, which I guess could connect to Cathedral. But at the same time, the blind man in Cathedral didn't really have to sacrifice much. He felt the feeling of empathy, and he wanted to change the way the husband in the story felt. And that act of just trying to show him how to really see the world was empathy in itself.
Okay.
I agree with you guys. Well, the text that I read was a TED Talk, and it was about a person. It was called "What It's Really Like to Have Autism," and he talked about equality and how there isn't a difference between a person diagnosed with autism and diabetes. This connects to empathy by making us perceive the detail differently. We should feel empathy for those who are born out of the human spectrum, because in the end, having autism can be the same thing as having diabetes. It's the idea that the abnormal is not a defect as society perceives it. It is just another way to play life. And I think that's what the guy from this TED Talk was just trying to get out to his audience, that people just play life differently. This relates to the example that I wanted to discuss of the Xbox and the PlayStation being two different consoles who both have their own programs to run CDs. You can't put an Xbox CD into a PlayStation because it just won't work. It's the same thing as you can't make a person with autism think the same thing as a person who doesn't have it, because it just won't work.
Okay. I really like that whole connection with the whole Xbox and PlayStation thing. I wanted to kind of bring up the question of, since the title of my text is called "Should There Be a Limit to Empathy?" Do you guys think that there should be a limit to empathy? Should we stop at some point, or are actions just as important?
I feel like there should be a limit to empathy, whereas you can relate to the person but not let it affect the way you are around them completely, because as some people might not like being treated differently from others, and it might make them feel bad even without you thinking or being your intention.
You guys, this is a really awesome discussion, and I'm sad to cut it off, but we are out of time. Great work. Round of applause for the first group to go. That's always the biggest challenge. Yay! Okay. Does anybody have any feedback for them? Any strengths that you saw? Anything they said that you thought was really interesting? Anything you'd like to see improved on as we move forward?
I really liked how Jonathan used that analogy with the PS4 and the Xbox to autism, and I feel like if someone like wasn't really understanding what the whole discussion was about, I feel like that really clarified it and made it more simple to understand.
I agree with Layla. That was like my first thing that I was gonna say. And I also wrote down that they had like really good questions and they were like building off of each other really well.
Anybody else? Awesome. Great work, first group. We're going to go ahead and transition to group 2, which is Layla, Yana, Kiara, Christian, and Alina. I'm going to go ahead and give you guys the full 5 because all 5 of you are here. You guys can turn your mics off. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I also had what it's really like to have autism with the TED Talk. And the first question I want to ask is, why do people want to find a cure so bad just for a different way of thinking, for example, such as autism? And I really wanted to bring this up because one quote that the guy said is, he said they see it as a negative thing, as a disease, but it's just another way of thinking and looking at the world. And am I diseased if I just think differently? So I just want to know, like, what do you guys think about that? And do you guys agree, or what do you guys think?
I feel like that was like a really strong quote. Like, wow, that was just good. And I feel like I like see like where you're coming from. Like, I agree with you, obviously. Like, I feel like, why are people trying to find a cure for just like thinking differently? Because like, if you really think about it, like, they're like in a way smarter than us. Like, they have different like thoughts than us. Like, we can't even like get to like, you know, the level of thinking. So I agree with you. And I feel like in a way this almost connects to mine because I read this is water. And my like article or like my speech was like mostly about like having awareness of what's around you, but then at the same time being able to get out of that, like he calls it a quote unquote default setting. So like being able to like get away from that default setting and think about like further in, if that makes sense.
This also
oh.
okay. This connects to my to what I read. I read How to Be Happy, and the default setting, right, is like our negative thinking. And what mine talked about is how, like, scientifically, how we automatically think negatively and how to conquer our negative thoughts. So I wanted to ask, how does the person that wrote your story or your author convey their way to of being happy?
Well, in mine, he does. I read The Limits of Empathy, and he kind of talks about how like empathy doesn't really truly lean you towards the right like action. I mean, it shows you the right action, but it doesn't really push you towards it. And he kind of talks about how like rather people should push codes and morals because it kind of like holds them accountable because he connects this idea of how the Nazis would cry as they hurt the Jewish people, but they still would do it. So it kind of like the empathy is there, but it kind of contradicts. Yeah.
In my article, I listened to a TED Talk, Art and Design of Empathy in Everyday Life, and the person that was talking was Jason, and he made examples of basic everyday life situations. Like when we're at the airport, he talks about how no one talks about a good experience and everyone just complains. And if you think about like the passengers, they always had like a problem when it came to airport security, but no one ever thinks about how the security themselves feel like and what they have to go through because they deal with like hundreds of angry passengers that they don't really understand what's going on with them, and people just choose to ignore how the other person may feel. So I have a question, and like, how does your text bring up the situations and the difference of uses of empathy in everyday life?
So I feel like in my TED Talk, the guy really does a good way of doing that one method that we talked about, where it's like 2 plus 2. I think it was called something like that. And it's just like he doesn't like go out and say, okay, this is how you guys should be empathetic. I feel like he just gives you the facts, how we all have these stereotypes, and he like goes against these stereotypes with actual facts, and then like it just naturally makes you feel bad. So he doesn't even need to say anything about empathy because it just really hits you in the heart. And I feel like that's a lot more powerful than literally just saying this is how to be empathetic and things like that.
In my article, he kind of brings up the idea that empathy has like a sense of biasness towards it because he says that many would feel bad for a cute victim rather than an ugly one. And I feel like if we think about it, like I could kind of like connect to this because like if you were to see an ugly cat in the street, you wouldn't want to like take it, but if you were to see a cute dog, you would, because like you'll feel bad for like more for some reason.
Yeah, I definitely see that point of view, Christian. And for like my speech, it was more just about like making like empathy is like having awareness in a sense. And because like the first sentence of my speech, those are like that's like the most powerful because he talks about two fish in the water, and then like an old wise fish comes and asks the two young fish like, well, like how is the water? And then that's when like they become aware of like they're in the water and like that they've never just noticed like water, you know, like the simple things around you. So
Awesome. That was really wonderful, guys. Does anybody have any feedback for that fabulous second group?
I think one of their strengths was that there definitely was an equity of voice. Like everybody talked and brought up their own points.
Definitely, Ben. Definitely. Something I liked is that the questions you guys asked, like, lent themselves towards being answered by the other text. Like it wasn't just like, hey, can you answer this question I had about my text? It was like, this text made me think about this thing. What do you think your authors would say? How do you think about that? Anything else? Cool. All right, let's go ahead and go on to group 3. Friends, as soon as you start talking, I'll start the timer, and I believe there are there's 3 of us in this group, so I'll give you guys 3 minutes. Oh gosh.
I guess I'll start it off. I wanted to start off with the text, The Limits of Empathy. A quote that I found was, "You may feel a pang for the homeless guy across the side of the street, but the odds are that you're not going to cross the street to give him $1." And this text kind of looks down upon empathy in a way compared to the other text. So I just wanted to ask, what do you guys think of that?
Well, I can understand the viewpoint. I think your text is trying to say that, similar to how other people were saying, how I think someone said an analogy about a cute dog that you'd go to and an ugly cat that you wouldn't. I think that's a similar situation to what you're saying. In my text, this is Waters. I think Kiara mentioned it, the 2 fish story, how they realized they were in water but never understood it. It's just all about perspective, basically. So building off of that, I want to ask a question about how empathy and well-being correlates in your story.
Well,
in mine, which was I read Nick Cave, The Sound Suits, he felt bad for the African Americans who were going through police brutality. So he created sound suits to kind of like show what he felt and like express it to everyone so that everybody else could understand. So I think that he was in a well-being because he wasn't going through anything tough, but he had empathy for those who were. So he created pieces of work for them.
Oh, yeah, that's smart. My text states to be a little less arrogant, to have just a little critical awareness about myself and my certainties. And I saw that as a huge like VIP within the text, because I think it just represents the whole like meaning of empathy, to just understand your surrounding and to know that not everything you think is going to be true to someone else.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like in the sunscreen song or whatever it was called, Everybody's Free to Wear Sunscreen. It says, don't be reckless with other people's hearts. Don't put up with people who are reckless with yours, which is kind of like what you were talking about.
Yeah, I think all these texts show some sort of like correlation to like empathy, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
So I want to ask you guys about how well-being is overall shown in your text. Naram, I don't think you mentioned that.
Oh, so well-being, I feel like, well, if it's a big part of like all these texts, but I'm not too quite sure. I feel like my text kind of focused on more of like the feeling of empathy and like not really doing anything based off of the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how that really connects to the well-being part.
Did you guys think that the man in the cathedral had well-being?
I saw some sort of correlation with my text and the cathedral. So like, I don't know about well-being, but I know about empathy for sure, because you kind of understood the blind man's perspective towards the end. And I guess if you can have some sort of empathy, I think that would lead to a better well-being. I think that's the whole connection.
Yeah. So do you think that well-being and understanding connect?
Yeah,
I would say so.
Because understanding is basically similar to empathy, to have an understanding of someone else's perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think you guys have kind of figured out a connection that we hadn't explicitly said. I'm sorry, Humphrey is very upset that I'm not actively holding him. Does anybody have any feedback for that group?
A strength could be how the inclusion of members to ensure the quality of the conversation and get everyone's input. I think it was Noir who asked one of his members to see what their thought of the question was.
I also thought was really good is how they brought up past discussions into their own discussion.
Who said that? Was that Alina?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that's an excellent point. Awesome. All right. So let's go ahead and move on to, I'm sorry, group 4. And we've got 3 people for that. So let's go to it.
Okay, so I guess I'll start. I saw the tech talk art and design of empathy, and he stated that empathy recently has sort of jumped the shark, which like means that we don't really see empathy that much anymore. Why do you guys think that is?
I think that empathy is kind of lost because people are so quick to judge other people just based on such little things, instead of understanding them.
Yeah, that's true. He also stated the difference between sympathy and empathy. He stated that sympathy is like a dangerous place to be because like people don't really gain anything out of it. You don't really get like good advice from sympathy.
So, my text was kind of talking about how a lot of the times people focus on negative things as opposed to positive ones, and that it's unhealthy that people do that so much. So, do you guys think that using empathy more often would do you think using empathy more often would make people like generally more happier or think more positively?
My article kind of contradicts that because it says that empathy really isn't like something that helps you do good things. It's a burst of positive like input. So if someone's like nice to you, then you're more likely to help other people.
Yeah, so Ms. Ramos asked to define sympathy and empathy. Sympathy means like feeling bad for somebody else, and empathy is more like putting yourself in their shoes. My TED talk stated that empathy builds experience, and experience builds commerce. So like companies like Apple, they use empathy and experience to make better products.
So my text was compassion in the individual, and one line that stood out to me was whether people are beautiful and friendly or unattractive and disruptive, ultimately they are human beings. So my question is that does is being more accepting an important part of empathy?
Well, I kind of think that that it is because when like people said in earlier conversations, how like the contrast between like seeing like an ugly animal and like a cuter animal and treating them differently. When you like when you like kind of like you said, like you accept them, or like you're actually using empathy like to its to like its actual like to its actual potential, then you think about both of them in their own positions, regardless of how you personally view them.
I agree with Ben because if you're more accepting of someone, then you get a better view of what they're thinking and you can help them with it better.
Okay, so let's group four. I think that's group four. Does anybody have any feedback for group number?
Wait, Chris, can you mute that? Can you mute that? Sorry. I was like to say that I really liked their explanation of sympathy and empathy.
That helps, doesn't it? To kind of have that as two different things.
Mm-hmm.
I also like how Rachid said how empathy builds experience. That really stood out to me.
Yeah. You should watch that TED Talk because it's all about how like thinking empathetically can actually help like business owners create better products. So thinking about what will it actually be like to hold an iPhone and have the experience of having an iPhone and using it. How will that impact a person day to day? That's like help to build a continually better iPhone. Anybody else? Okay. We've got Kiara's laughing. Love it. Y'all, we're whipping through. Okay, so we've got Carla, Charday, Bisma, Lorena, and Carlos. And I think their whole group is here. So I'm going to go ahead and give them the full 5 minutes. Start whenever you're ready, guys.
Okay, so I'll start with the question, is empathy more positive or negative as described by your text, Bouquet? I'll start off by saying I read the limits of empathy, and my text was more on the negative side. That empathy, it states in the text that empathy leads to nepotism, it subverts justice, and juries give lighter sentence to defendants that show sadness. And so the text basically says that empathy isn't really good. And by this definition, it also says that empathy doesn't really lead to moral or immoral action. These actions, they're like mostly decided by like a person's moral code or obligation to something or their sense of duty. So I'd like to ask the rest of my group members, how does their textbook define empathy? Does it define it as positive or negative?
So my text was the TED Talk of what it's really like to have autism, and I didn't think it was really biased. I think it was trying to explain what empathy was, because he was trying to explain how people feel bad for people that have autism and they need to find a cure. But in reality, that they just had to accept who they are and that it's just a different way of thinking. And one quote that I really liked that he said was, "And I may not think like you, act like you, but I am still human." And so he's trying to say that empathy can be interpreted different ways, because even though he might not feel the way we feel, that he still has some sort of empathy inside of him.
Adding on to what Carlos said, I read this is water, and in the text it didn't really talk about if it's positive or negative, but it did talk a lot about how we should be empathetic and how yeah, it just basically talked a lot about how we should, but it didn't really define if it's good or bad. But if I were to say if it was good or bad, I would say it's more positive, but it all depends on your well-being and your point of view on the situation.
5 ways to listen better, and my text said that empathy was really important because it helps us make connections to others, and when we make connections to others, it makes us have more experience in how to empathize with others.
Adding on to what someone said, does empathy cause the well-being of other societies? Yeah, I could start off by saying my text said that it really doesn't. It's more a moral code or obligation to something or a sense of duty. So what do you guys think?
I feel like it isn't really a sense of duty because some people might not feel empathy towards others, or they might think it differently, interpret it in a different way. But I feel like it's something that people should do in general. Like it's a good moral to live by, because if you don't, you want to be able to feel how others feel, so you're not based one sided in any situation.
But do you think that it causes someone to like take action to cause the well-being of others?
I think that feeling empathy and acting upon it are two separate things because someone could feel like coming up again with the idea of the cute dog or the ugly cat that some people act upon it while others don't. And I think the reason is because of their well-being and how they're feeling in the current situation.
Yeah, I agree with Lorena. It's like empathy is something you feel and not necessarily something that you can act upon. And so acting upon something is based on your decision. And empathy is more like having a feeling towards someone and like trying to understand what they're trying to feel.
Answering Sade's question in the cathedral, the the husband's whole idea or overview of blind people really affected how long it took him to empathize with the blind man. So I think it does play a role.
I agree with that. I think it's more of like your experiences or like how you think or how you decide what is right or what is wrong. And that decides on like whether you can empathize with someone or not.
Thank you so much, Group 5. Any feedback for Group number 5? And special thanks to Sade for typing in the chat bar and dealing with difficult technology. We've all been there. Something that I thought was really interesting in this discussion is you guys were kind of talking about like it was very much like the limits of empathy. David Brooks quote, for those of you who read it, you were talking about like, does empathy actually cause us to do anything? Like, yes, it's a nice emotion, it's something good that we should feel for each other, but does it actually cause us to do anything? Or like what actually makes us live empathetically, like actually do things for others because we understand how they're going through? And I thought that was really interesting. All right. No one has anything else. We're going to hop on with the last group of the day. Group 5, you can go ahead and get started. I think that should be Caesar Jr. and Kyle maybe is here. Go ahead and get talking.
Okay, so the text that I read was Project Cabrini Green, And basically, what this one was about was it was about this building that was being torn down, and the people that lived in it. And it sent us to a link. And in this link, it was a picture of a building. And the building, if you clicked on it, there was different types of audios, different people that were speaking, all created by people that cared for Cabrini Green, people that decided to help, and it's public art. Something that stood out to me was in one of them it said that this last building die, don't cry. The spirit of Cabrini lies and will rise once again. So basically, I felt it as that people were really caring for Cabrini Green because it was their home.
I read The Limits of Empathy, and something that really stood out to me was the quote where says that people who are empathetic are more sensitive when they see other people suffering. And I feel like that connects to me, like personally, because whenever I see somebody like a poor person, a homeless person outside in the streets, I usually like start to get sensitive because I feel bad for them. Like I have I have a feeling that I have to do something about it, so I will like go on, give him $1 or something. Well, and I have a question: is being empathetic like make you a better person?
I think that being empathetic doesn't exactly make you a better person, but it makes you a better person if you act upon it. Because everyone can be empathetic, but there's a difference between being empathetic and actually doing something about being empathetic. Like I think in the cathedral the when the old man was talking with the husband, how at first the husband wasn't like was unsure about him being about everything that was going on, and then once he actually like did what the blind man told him to do, like close his eyes and just he felt what he was feeling, and I feel like that is something important. Kyle, what do you think?
I would agree. I would agree with what you said right now, because at the beginning, I guess like he was being a little empathetic, but he was also judging him at the same time without even knowing him. And I feel like this connects something with like don't judge a book by its cover. Like that's what I got out of it from that text, the cathedral.
All right, thanks, gentlemen. Kyle, I'm sorry that your mic is broken too. We just can't seem to catch a break here. But I really appreciated what Caesar and Junior added to the conversation. Is there anything in particular from that conversation that stood out to you guys?
I thought it was really cool when Caesar brought in the fact that being empathetic isn't enough to just be empathetic. You actually have to take actions to fulfill that. And that like really opened my eyes. I was like, wow, like that's so true.
Yeah. Awesome. I kind of wonder with that, so like, what can we do then to be empathetic right now? In this crazy, crazy, crazy times?
Like for people who like are at most risk, because like I feel a lot of people are kind of like, oh, like ew, I have to like stay inside, or like people are protesting, they're like, this is just unfair. And I think that maybe when we think about people who like are most vulnerable to the coronavirus and like all the complications and stuff, it that like we can think more about how important that is, that we continue to keep trying to distance.
So then social distancing is like a way of demonstrating or like acting on your empathy. Cool. All right. One last thing for us today. I would like you guys to respond to the exit slip in the chat bar. And you can respond to one of two things. You can either talk about how did this discussion go for you, like just give me feedback. Are digital pinwheels working? Is that something that you could do again? What would you want to change? And then if that question you don't feel like answering, I'd also be interested to hear your thoughts on how we can be empathetic in global pandemic times. As soon as you post in the chat, you are free to go. Sade, I feel the same way, and it's like crazy. Mm. Kara, same. I get teary-eyed when I do these because it's like almost like school, but not. Bye, Christian. Thank you. Richie, that is an excellent, excellent point. I've been thinking a lot about what we can do for essential workers and kind of like show them our support, but it's hard. Have a great day. Junior, that's a great idea too, trying to be positive. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Miss you too, Kira. Have a good weekend.
Bye, Miss Ramos.
No.